Okay, this week we're going to be looking at the Greek civilization. Let's take a look and see where this is geographically. Greece is a strip of land or territory of southern Europe that sticks out into the Mediterranean Sea. It's between Asia Minor to the east, or Anatolia, and the Italian peninsula that looks like a boot there on the left that sticks into the Mediterranean. In between Anatolia and the Italian peninsula is Greece. And Greece is made up of a lot of different islands and coastal land there. Let's see if we can't look a little bit closer at that. But before we do, let's take a look at our timeline. Here we go. So this is the Greek civilization, part of our study of the ancient world. The Greek civilization is basically broken up into three major time periods. We have the Bronze Age Greece. We're going to be talking about the Minoans and the Myceneans. And then there's the Greek Dark Ages from about 1100 to 776 BC. And then that'll be followed by Iron Age Greece. And this is the time period that most of us are familiar with when we study or read about Greek civilization. This is the Archaic period, the Classical period, and the Hellenistic period. So we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail. Let's go back to our slide here. Hey, let's look a little bit more closely at this geography or this geographical region we know as Greece. There we go. We zoom in. You can see that Greece, to the west of Greece, you can see the Italian peninsula. You can see the Adriatic Sea along its western coast and the Ionian Sea. And then to its east is the Aegean Sea. That's all of that is part of the larger network of water called the Mediterranean Sea. Now let's look at some geography that you should probably know about when it comes to Greece. First off, it's very, very mountainous. If you can look at that topography map there, you can see all of that orange space is basically mountains. The whole territory of Greece is basically mountains. The other thing that you need to know about Greece geographically is that it's made up of a chain of islands called an archipelago. And I have a hard time saying that word, archipelago. That's the way you're probably supposed to say that. But the bottom line is it's a chain of islands. There are thousands of islands that make up this chain of islands. You can see between Anatolia and Greece just so many different islands that are going to make up this part of the world. And then the third thing that makes up Greece geographically that you should be aware of is that there's a lot of coastal territory. There is a lot of coastline. All right. Now, what is this going to result in? Well, because it's so mountainous and because there are so many islands, what you're going to see is instead of a unified nation state, we're going to end up with a bunch of individual city-states. So each individual city is going to control its own city and its own territory right around it, but they're not going to unify. So if you can imagine, like the United States, if Texas and Colorado and Arizona and Mississippi and all the different states were all individual and they had no real connection aside from maybe a shared culture and a shared language, there's no real political unity, etc. That's what this would look like. No real unity. The mountains, the water, it all just separated it. So a profound lack of unity. And then the other thing that's going to impact how this is going to impact Greece is that sea trade is going to be incredibly important to the Greek people. Now, here's some key geographical terms you're going to want to make sure you're familiar with. Again, this is the word I have a hard time saying, but archipelago, there you go. There's all of those islands that all make up that island chain in Greece. The other term you're going to want to know is something called a peninsula. And you're probably familiar with that term when it comes to United States geography. Florida is a peninsula. It's a piece of land that's basically sticking out into and surrounded by mostly water. And then the third term here is the isthmus. There we go, isthmus. And an isthmus is a narrow stretch of land that connects a peninsula or two parts of mainland together. And so in this case, the isthmus here connects mainland Greece to the Peloponnese peninsula. So those are three key terms you're going to want to know. Now here's some geographical toponyms that you're going to want to be familiar with. The Corinthian Isthmus, and we just pointed that out. There it is right there. Corinth is going to be the main city located here, but that's an important stretch of land. The next thing you're going to want to be familiar with is the Peloponnesus Peninsula. And again, we just mentioned that a minute ago, but that's that entire peninsula sticking out into the Mediterranean with the Ionian Sea off its western coastline. So the Peloponnesus. And of course, the main, we did not mean to go forward. Let me go back. There we go. We're going to have to run through those two, there we go. Two animations there. You're going to want to know the island of Crete down at the southern part of the chain of islands. It's the largest island in the chain. Mycenae, which is right in the middle of the Peloponnesus there, very important city. Athens, who you've probably heard of, is also an important city. Sparta, Olympia, and then of course the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea. These are all important geographical toponyms that you're going to want to know. So let's take a look again at this map here. We zoom back out to the Mediterranean. You're going to see in the red, that's all Greece, but all the pink, because they're so involved in maritime trade or sea trade, they're going to plant colonies all over the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea. And so that's important to know. It's not just this small area of Greece, but they're going to be incredibly influential throughout the Mediterranean. So again, Greece is what the Romans called this land, but the Greeks did not call themselves Greeks. They referred to themselves as Hellenes from this king Hellen. They were named after him. They believed that they called their land Hellas. And Hellen was, in Greek mythology, the king of Phthia, which is near, right across from Athens, really. So if you saw where Athens was on the map, that is where he was the king, Phthia. And so he is the originator of the Greeks, that they believe they were all descended from him. So let's take a look at the earliest Greek civilizations. Again, I'm going to zoom in on this timeline here. Let's take a look at this here. We're going to be looking at the Minoan civilization and the Mycenean civilization. These are the two early, what we call like pre-Greek civilizations. So I'm going to refer to these guys as the M&M Greeks, Minoans and Myceneans. Maybe that'll be a good way for you to remember the M&M Greeks, Minoans and Myceneans. Let's look at the Minoans real quick first. So the Minoans were centered in the island of Crete. This was where their capital was, at Knossos. That's where the incredibly important and large Minoan palace was that has been excavated. But the Minoan civilization is going to last roughly from around 2000 BC to 1450 BC. And there's zooming in on the island. There are numerous Cretan cities, but the most important was Knossos. Now, you've probably heard of a very important king, King Minos. He was the king of Crete. And here is a picture. Oh yes, he is definitely very pensive. He's thinking about something very important. Something's on his mind. But here is a picture of the palace. This is an artist's rendition of what his palace would have looked like. It was a significant structure. And if you notice this part right over here that's got color, there's like some blue and some red to the left, upper left here. I'm about to show you a picture. No, that's not it. It's right here in the middle. I'm sorry. In the middle towards the back with these three columns. This is the remains that's been restructured here on the island of Crete from the palace. Significant archaeological remains. But you may know, let's go back here. There we go to Mr. Minos, king of Crete. You may know him from the story of the Minotaur. If you remember, if you've learned this story, if you haven't, this is a fascinating story. His wife was unfaithful to him, and she gave birth to a half-man, half-bull. And this is what we call the Minotaur. And so King Minos had a labyrinth, an incredibly difficult maze designed by Daedalus. And some events came about that caused him to be very angry at the king of Athens. And so he required that the king of Athens send him sacrificial victims every year to sacrifice to this Minotaur. They would basically lead them into the labyrinth, which was so difficult they couldn't get out. And in the meantime, the Minotaur would hunt them down. But after the third year, or on the third year, the prince of Athens, the son of the king of Athens, his name is Theseus, and he volunteered. Let's go look at him. Let's see if we can't find a picture of him real quick. He's going to volunteer to be one of the sacrificial victims so that he can hunt down the Minotaur and kill him. And here's some artwork showing the Minotaurs, another rendition of him. Here's a mosaic showing the Minotaur in the labyrinth. And here's some great artwork showing another version of the Minotaur and Theseus going up against him. Eventually, he will go into the labyrinth, but the princess, one of the daughters of King Minos, her name is Ariadne, is going to help him by giving him thread so that he can find his way back out. And sure enough, he kills Minotaur, saves the sacrificial victims, and gets out. So that's a famous story that you guys are probably familiar with. And here's a very famous clay vase that shows the story of Theseus and the Minotaur. So the Minoans loved their sea trade. They were very good at it. If you're an island nation, you got to know how to sail and you got to know how to trade on the sea. And they had they were amazing artists and put together pottery with amazing artwork on it. You can see this sea or maritime themes or motifs that are a part of these vessels. They traded all kinds of things, honey and pottery, but olive oil and olives is something that was very important to their economy. You can see this pot here showing them, or vase, showing them harvesting olives from a tree. And by the way, that's basically how they still do it today. Shake the tree and get all the olives and pick them up. So let's talk now about the Myceneans. This is a civilization that basically succeeded and replaced the Minoans somewhere right around about 1600 BC to about 1100 BC. And you can see that not only are they covering the island of Crete and many of the parts of the archipelago, but all of mainland Greece, essentially, or much of mainland Greece, is going to be ruled by this city, Mycenae, and this will give us the Mycenean civilization. And just like the Minoans, they were really into sea trade, but not just sea trade, piracy. They were very much a war culture, and not that kind of pirate, different kind of pirates, but same job. But they're also going to have amazing fine ware. I think, honestly, not as beautiful as the Minoans, but some great fine ware, beautiful pottery that they traded in. But sea trade was incredibly important to the Myceneans as well. So here's another little map here showing you the Greek islands. Now, the Trojan War is going to happen during this time period with the Myceneans. If you remember the story of the Trojan War, we're going to have the Trojan prince Paris is going to abduct. By the way, if you notice where Troy is way over here in Anatolia or Asia Minor, and they're basically going to be in conflict with the Mycenaean Empire, Mycenaean civilization, for trade routes that go up to the Black Sea and along the coast. So there's a lot of conflict here. But what's going to lead up to this Trojan War is that the Trojan prince, his name is Paris, he's going to abduct Helen, the wife of a Spartan king by the name of Menelaus. And this guy's brother, Menelaus's brother, is the king of Mycenae. His name is Agamemnon. It's hard to say that word. And they're basically going to start a war, send an entire fleet out to Troy. Here you go. There's a little ship, and we're going to sell that ship. Woohoo! Look at them go. Several thousand ships they're going to sail to Troy. And if you remember the story of the Trojan War, the Greeks are not going to be very successful against the Trojans, but they come up with a plan. They build a wooden horse and hide some soldiers inside of it, who then pretend like the rest of the Greeks have left. The Trojans are so excited about this wonderful gift left for them that they pull it into the city. And while they're having a great party, the Greek soldiers sneak out, open the gates, and in comes the Greek armies and absolutely destroy the city of Troy. Now, what's interesting about this, there's Troy, there you go, it's burning, that this is going to be, according to Roman mythology, is going to lead to the creation of the Roman people, because one of the survivors of the Trojan War is going to be a guy by the name of Aeneas. And it's this guy, Aeneas, who's going to travel. Here we go, there's Aeneas. And he's going to travel. You can read this in Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid. He's going to travel across the Mediterranean, some great trials. He's going to meet the queen of the Carthaginians, Dido, but eventually he's going to settle on the Tiber River, and his descendants are going to be Romulus and Remus, and they will found Rome in 753 BC. So the Trojan War is going to lead to eventually the founding of Rome, which is going to be a great competitor against the Greeks for control of the sea trade routes in the Mediterranean Sea. Well, listen, somewhere right around 1100 BC, that should say 1100 BC, I'll fix that later, a lot of different civilizations in the ancient Near East, including the Mycenean civilization, is going to collapse. Some people speculate it was weather pattern shifts, weather change, climate change, drought, maybe some sort of volcano action that caused disruption in the weather patterns, and basically significant collapse of civilizations across the ancient Near East and the Mediterranean world, and the Myceneans will also collapse. That's going to, here we go, there they are, they're collapsing. And that's going to lead us to the Mycenaean, there you go, it's disappeared. It's going to lead us to the Mycenaean Dark Ages, which is essentially going to last for about 300 years or so, 1100 to 776 BC. Now, just correspondingly, this is the same time period, if you remember from Bible history, this is the same time period of the Joshua narrative, where Joshua and the Israelites come into the promised land of Canaan and take over the land. This is the time period of all the judges, Solomon, David, Saul. I said those kings in reverse order. It should have been Saul, David, and Solomon. All the kings of Israel. The stories of Elijah and Elisha, the prophet Isaiah. That's all during this time period here, during the dark ages of the Greek civilization. Now, here we go. Greek Dark Ages. All right, so now we're going to have the next period called the Archaic period. Let's take a look back on our timeline so we can see where we're at here. We looked at the Mycenean civilization and the Minoans in the Bronze Age. We looked very quickly at the Greek Dark Ages, and now we're going to look at the Iron Age, specifically the Archaic period. Let's go back to our slide here. What's happening during this time period? Well, during this time period, the Greeks are going to develop what we call the Greek city-states. This is basically territories that are controlled by strong cities within that territory, but again, not a unified Greek nation, just a whole bunch of city-states, and they're all fighting each other for control. So let's take a look at this here. Here we go. Now, during this time period, there's going to be tremendous innovations throughout the Greek culture. Technology, culture, politics, economy, and even their military is going to have significant innovations that are going to come at this time period. There's going to be a Greek revival of their culture. Homer's going to write the Iliad and the Odyssey. We're going to develop, again, as I said, the Greek city-state called the polis. The Greek alphabet is going to be developed at this time period. The famous Greek military construction called the hoplites is going to be invented. And again, this is the time period where the Greeks are basically going to colonize throughout the Mediterranean, and the beautiful red figure pottery is going to be created during this time period. Now, again, here's Homer. He's going to write the Iliad, the Odyssey. This is how we know most of Roman mythological history. We're going to find about Zeus, and we're going to find out about Mount Olympus, and we're going to find out about how he rules all the gods and how he created humans. All of this is told in the story of the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's the Greek gods there, the whole pantheon. There's, again, the Greek colonization of the Mediterranean. Now, one of the most important things that develops during this time period is the polis, P-O-L-I-S. We get the English word metropolitan. The word police comes from this. And the polis, again, was a Greek city-state. The city was the most important entity in the Greek culture. And you can see this picture here. You see again, most of these cities were centered in the coastland. So you've got a bay or an harbor there where trade comes in, a little port part of the town there, and then a road that leads up to the main city. You can see the fortifications. But then at the Acropolis, or the top of the hill, was often where you'd have the palaces and the temples to the special deities for that city. And that's the Greek polis. Let's look a little bit closer at the main area of the polis, called the agora. The agora is an open space in a Greek city that was used for public gatherings, including discussing of politics, religion, commerce and trade, and social gatherings. And you can see here in this picture, you can see different merchants that are trading. You can see inside the wall of that home on the right, there's a home where a woman is cooking for her family. You can see in the top of that house, it looks like some important politicians are probably discussing either business or politics. In the middle of the slide, you can see some people, looks like they're having a discussion of some kind. At the temple, you can see the temple towards the back of the agora. And then at the top of the hill, or the Acropolis, you can see a major temple at the top there. So this was a major construction at just about every Greek city-state. And the agora is going to be very similar to the Roman Forum that we'll talk about here in a couple of weeks. Now, politically, we're going to see some shifts in Greek culture. We're going to start off, like many cultures, with a king, called a monarchy. Eventually, when people get upset enough that they don't like one person ruling them, they're going to have what's called an oligarchy, or rule by a few people who are going to make all the decisions. And then a lot of times that doesn't work out so well, and somebody rises to power, and he ends up becoming a tyrant. And this is going to lead to one of the greatest legacies of the Greek people, which is the giving of democracy. And we'll look at that here, because that's going to lead us to the classical period from 480 to 323 BC. Again, let's take a look at our timeline here. Here we go. We're right here in the middle of the Greek Iron Age. This is the classical period. And let's go back to our slideshow. And so one of the greatest contributions of the Greek civilization is democracy. When people got tired of a tyrant leading them, an autocratic ruler who basically ruled for his own benefit, the people rose up and decided they wanted to rule themselves. That's what democracy means, rule by the people. And two of the most important city-states during this time period are going to be the Athenians and the Spartans. My, don't they look terrifying. And they're going to fight for control of major parts of Greek mainland. And that's going to lead us to the Greek and Persian wars that we're going to talk about this week. We had talked about last week the Persian Empire that's going to stretch throughout the Mesopotamian world, from Persia, the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, down to Egypt, and west all the way into Anatolia. That's that entire yellow space there. And that's going to put them in conflict with the Greek city-states, who are going to have several colonies on the Anatolian coastline. And that's going to put them in direct conflict with the Persians. Eventually, we're going to see a series of wars. It's going to last about 50 years, from 499 to 449 BC. And it's going to start with a revolt on the Ionian Revolt on the western coast. We're going to talk about several of these battles. We're going to talk about the Battle of Marathon Beach, which is a great story. We're going to talk about the Battle of the Hot Gates, or Thermopylae, which the Greeks lose that one. If you've ever watched the movie 300, that's the story here. But eventually, the Persians will lose at the Battle of Salamis Bay, which is a famous naval battle. They'll lose again at Plataea and Mycale. And that's going to leave the Greek scorecard 4-2, and the Greeks are going to be the winners. So eventually the Persians are going to lose out to the Greeks, and eventually are going to end up overturning the Persian Empire. But right now we're going to see major competition between the Greeks and the Athenians and the Spartans in the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League as they're fighting for control of these city-states. The Spartans are going to lead the Peloponnesian League. In other words, it's an alliance of city-states on the Peloponnesus. The Athenians are going to lead the Delian League, which is some mainland city-states, and they're basically going to fight for several decades, just a Greek civil war, essentially. Eventually, the king of Macedonia, you can see up there the green territory, a guy by the name of Philip of Macedon, is going to unite the Greeks, but not because they just really want to unite. He's basically going to conquer them. He looks pretty ferocious dude. He's going to conquer and unite the Greeks between 359 and 332 BC. And when his life is cut short, his son, you've probably heard of him, Alexander the Great, is going to become the king, and he is going to spread the Greek civilization and empire and get revenge on the Persians, and he's basically going to conquer the Persian Empire and Egypt all within 9 years. He's going to take over all of that territory and spread the Greek civilization throughout the East and the Middle East. Now, an important term that you need to be familiar with is the spread of Greek culture. This is called Hellenization. And they're going to spread freedom, beauty, creative spirit, justice, moderation, truth. These are all important cultural ideas and values that the Greeks had. And they're going to spread this throughout the Greek Empire, or Alexander's empire. Eventually, Alexander is going to die. Some people say he was assassinated. Some say it was an accident. But he's going to die and be buried in Egypt. And this is an image of his tomb. His empire will be divided by 4 of his generals. And we have 3 of them shown here in this map. You can see the Macedonian general Antigonus, and then the Syrian territories can be taken over by the Greek Seleucus, and then the Greek general Ptolemy is going to take over the Egyptian territory. So you can see that the Mediterranean at this point is divided between those 3 Greek generals in the east, and in the west, the Roman Empire is starting to spread. At this point, it's just the Roman Republic, I should say. That's probably a better term, and I should probably change that word empire to Roman Republic. But this is going to lay the way for some conflict between the Greeks and the Romans. Now let's talk about the very last time period here. This is the Hellenistic period from 332 to 146. And again, if we look at our timeline, this is it right here, the Hellenistic period, the last part of the Greek civilization. So let's take a quick look at this. Here we go. So Hellenization, again, is taking place. This is the spread of Greek culture. Don't confuse this with the term Hellenistic, which means Greek-like. There's going to be different people groups that are going to want to adopt Greek culture, and they're going to be like the Greeks. In other words, Hellenistic. And this will come into play in the biblical narrative, where we see the Jewish people fighting to be contemporary and modern and like the Greeks, Hellenistic, and those that want to stay like their past and stay with conservative with the way that they had always done things. And this is going to put them in conflict with one another. That's a whole nother story. Hey, let's look here at the Greek culture. Some things that are important to know about it. It's human focused. They love philosophy and science. They're going to praise the human mind and reason. They love literature. They focused on the human lives and acts. Physical activity is very important to the Greeks. They're going to focus on development of physical perfection. Artwork is going to focus on the human form. They're very good. You can see in this bust of Socrates, very detailed, very lifelike. And they're going to stress the dignity and the uniqueness of man, unfortunately, apart from the relationship with God. And that's going to be an unfortunate part of this wonderful Greek culture. Now here's some very famous Greek historians, philosophers, and poets. You've got Socrates and Aristotle. We've got Plato. Who else do we have here? Hippocrates, Herodotus, Pythagoras, and Thales of Miletus. So these are some famous Greeks that you should probably be aware of their names. We'll talk some more about who they are and what legacies they left us. Now, at the end of the 1st century BC, this is what the Mediterranean world is going to look like. The Romans are going to start to spread east, and they're going to take over Greek mainland, and so boom, they're gone. And then eventually they're going to conquer the Syrian Seleucids, and boom, the Romans have taken control of Anatolia and Israel. And they're basically going to take over North Africa and Egypt, and boom, there is the Roman Empire. It's going to be in control of the entire Mediterranean world, which they will continue to expand and become the world's dominant power. And that's what we'll study next week. But right now, this week, we're going to continue to look more closely at all this and look at the Greek civilization.